I try not to say that. This special meeting to order. If we could please stand and pledge the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. So the first item on our agenda is budget discussion. Okay, Michael, I assume you or Sherry are going to start.
Yes, good evening. I'll start and then I'll hand the baton to Sherry. So I just wanted to once again thank the team of administrators for coming together several times on Friday to really look at that list of 9 that we had shared at our previous budget meeting, and then having that directive to indeed lower the percentage. We came together, we met, as you know, in the email shared twice that day, to really put forth the new budget reduction sheet, which was shared by Sherry, as well as to trim other line items to bring down that overall budget number to a 2.55%. So a lot of hard work went into that. And, you know, really it's the lowest that we could go while still being able to provide for the needs of all of our students. But with that intro, and I don't know, Sherry, if that was a good one or a bad one, feel free to take it over from there.
Okay. As Mr. Wilson said, we shared the spreadsheet of reduction analysis for the budget 21-22. We took the 9 items that we put in the budget, and we gave you 4 different scenarios, if you would, by eliminating each a series of items and really breaking it down to the overall 3 items that we absolutely have to have. And those being the SPED teacher and the 3 paraprofessionals. And we did knock it down by 1, so that was a good thing, but that's a net 0. As the note said, we eliminated the 1 para from item 7. However, the high school added a 0.4 ELA. Because of the elimination of the 4 building subs, it ended up being a net 0. So by eliminating the 1 through 6, we got it down to 3.05%. Then we met with the administrators and we carefully looked at everything throughout the budget to see where we could possibly make some additional cuts to get down to a lower percentage. We came up with additionally 174,000 additional cuts in a variety of different line items. 610 instructional supplies, 1, 2, 3 instructional paras, the substitutes at 119, certified subs. 431 is building repairs and maintenance, and the 745 is the technology equipment. And where we are now is a final amount of 2.55%. Now, all these things come at a cost. And we don't necessarily like this, but we did the best we could with administration to make some sacrifices to get down to the 2.55%. In order to get down to a 2% budget, we would have to additionally cut $175,000, which quite frankly, that would give us a 2.04%. I don't know where we're going to be able to do that. It'll be a very difficult task for sure. So with that, I will open it up for any further discussion or questions. If you have any, we will be happy to answer them for you. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just reflect a little bit. I was thinking about the budget and the process, and having experienced it for quite a few years in both Ansonia and Seymour. I think back to my very first job as an administrator, and I was advocating for my school at the time, Willow School, and the veteran superintendent said, well, Mr. Stramillo doesn't seem to understand that we need to work for the entire district, not just for his school. So I got a quick learning experience with that it's very difficult for administrators to be at a meeting and they're championing for their school and advocating for their school, and then they're hearing their colleagues do the same thing. So I know that that's not a fun thing. And I say in retrospect, I'm glad that I'm not doing it as a paid person anymore, but I still know that's a very difficult thing. So I would just like to congratulate the administrative team on coming to that. My major concern with this budget was I was a huge advocate for the nurse floater, but obviously that was not included in the request, because I know that one of my other responsibilities when I was an administrator was I was in charge of the nurses for the Ansonia district, and to find quality nurses and to get quality subs was an enormous task even back there, because school nurses are paid less than nurses in hospitals and other situations. So I'm always thankful for our school nurses in both Seymour and Ansonia for their effort, but sometimes you can't get what you want. And that's all I have to say. Who would like to speak next? Yes, I see Ms. Harmling's hand up.
Yes, thank you. Could someone talk a little bit about the elementary math resources, as well as the guided reading materials and even the SEL materials? And I mean, SEL materials, that's new, but typically those things would be covered by our ongoing textbook line item. And I thought that we were sort of in a cycle where, we had budgeted an amount that stayed steady every year, knowing that every year something would need to be replaced or acquired. So I guess to try to be more concise, my question is, why do these have to appear as things that are above and beyond what is typically in our curriculum or instructional materials line item?
Okay, who wants to address that? Michael or Vonda?
This is Mrs. Tenza. I can start. I'll touch on some of them. That is a good question. And regarding, let's talk about the elementary math resources. We do keep some money in our textbook, if you will, line item, which covers small purchases or replacements. But as the Board of Ed Subcommittee for Curriculum and Technology knows, the elementary math program, for lack of a better word, expired last year. They usually offer 6-year cycles for a program such as that. And that cycle includes not only the hardcover book, but also it includes an ongoing consumable fee. It also includes a digital license. So that 6 years expired last year. We began the pilot process and it was interrupted midway through by the pandemic. It was very difficult for our teachers to continue that pilot. So this year we had to pay more than we actually would have liked for access to our old materials because they had expired. The company no longer will sell you copies of the previous publications, and they won't allow you digital access. And we needed to have that. So we did pay for that this year under the new version. The tricky part of that is it does not align with what the teachers currently have. So when you look into piloting a new program, which our teachers have very kindly energized themselves and entered back into that pilot process, the initiation of a program is extremely costly, and it's not something that we budget for every year. So that cost is why that line item is in there. It would be, if we cut that, we're still going to end up with an obligation to pay something because our teachers will have no access to a digital platform that offers a lot of the ability to project on screen and have the children download or take assessments or workbook pages or what have you. So that would address the math.
Can I quick follow up before we talk about
Sure.
the guided reading, through the chair, if that's okay?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to point out that, in fact, the 1920 actual budget for textbooks and curriculum was about 160,000. So with the first version and then in this current year budget, we actually did go down already by 35,000. So I think it's important just to note a long-term, we had taken this line item down in the current budget year. So we're actually not going above and beyond what was there a year and 2 years ago. So I think that's just important to point out. So thank you for that. And
Sure.
So, and with the guided reading materials, if you could talk, Mrs. Tenza, about that and all that, the library investments that we made several years ago. And I know it's been several years, but I know that was a pretty good sized investment we made in the classroom libraries.
It was. So the investment that we made in the classroom libraries was to allow each teacher, it's really an amazing library. Each classroom teacher has a classroom set of leveled readers that align with our Calkins units of studies. So the books are leveled for the students and applicable to the various fictional, non-fictional units of study that we use. It allows the teachers to really dig in and teach the children where they are, because all of our readers are in different levels, and they're going to be in even broader range of levels next year. We're very aware of that. Some students maybe have slipped a little in their reading skills, and other students have continued to progress. And each classroom teacher is going to have a very wide diversity of readers and thinkers in their rooms. So that's one piece that we've already invested in. These, and I can certainly allow Mr. Alekna, because this was his building request, to address this as well, if that's okay through the chair. But these are designed to specifically meet the diverse needs of an increasingly diverse group of readers at Chatfield DePresti School.
Okay, I will allow Mr. Alekna to further elaborate. Mr. Alekna?
Sure. Mr. Alekna speaking. As a result of in the spring, we already had identified this fall that students were not making without the full year of guided reading for the 2019-2020 school year. Students didn't end at the end of the year where they normally, as many students would end at the end of the year benchmarks. And so what we began the year having is more first grade students still relying and needing access to guided reading books that were in the kindergarten levels, second grade into first grade, and third grade into second grade. And all of them, in particular, those grades I just named, it would be hard to prioritize one being worse than another in the predicament. And so as the year progressed, the classroom teachers were saying that, hey, we're going for guided reading books and we're competing with far more different teachers going for the same set of books, that we ended up having a congregation of students more than we normally would have at middle of the first grade level that should have, in a normal year, last year, have progressed to the second grade levels. And so we ended up having, because of the pandemic, a shortage, which has again continued because of what's happened this year, that the situation is going to get a little worse before it gets better. For it to get better, we need more resources to improve upon the situation.
Okay, any other questions? No one else? All right, Ms. Harm. All right, Mrs. Bruno, then I'll come back to you, Ms. Harmling. Ms. Harmling.
I had a question about items 1 and 2, and that's the permanent subs and the nurse floater. If we aren't able to add these positions, folks are still going to need coverage. And we heard a lot from parents, I think last year, this time, about challenges with coverage and having subs. So I'm just wondering where will we expect increases in the budget if we don't fill those two?
Okay, who wants to take that? Sherry?
The increases, well, by eliminating 4 permanent subs with benefits, that would be increases in the certified staff substitute line item to cover any teachers that are out. And the nurse floater, if we eliminate that, it would be charged to the nursing account, and we'd have to contract out to get coverage for the nurses. So that would be the salary account for nurses, which is 117. So those where the increased expenses would come into play if we didn't have these 2 positions.
Kristen, Bruno, are you all set with that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Ms. Harmling, you want to follow up? Ms. Harmling, you want to follow up?
Yes, I needed to find my screen. I have a lot of windows open. So I'll stay on the substitute question, but then I want to pop quickly back to the guided reader. So with the substitutes, the thing about it is that we see in the budget a dramatic planned increase. So a quick question, that's line item 119, is that where we would have seen the original 4 permanent subs? They would still be in line 119, even though they were permanent building subs, right?
Right, correct.
Okay, okay.
Mhm.
But I also see that, you know, year to date, because of the craziness that is this year, you know, we've only spent barely, not even $4,000 through the end of the year.
And that's because, remember, we have the grant. We have
Okay, great.
the grant that
Okay,
pays for the permanent building subs, and also a grant that provided for us to put teaching substitutes in the coronavirus relief grant.
okay. That the second part I
covered.
was not aware of. I knew that the permanent building subs were in the grant money, but I was not aware that all substitutes essentially were in.
They said if we had difficulty filling
Great.
the classroom with teachers because of COVID, that we were allowed to use that
That's
money for that.
So you might anticipate my next question. So what is your assessment of our end of the year numbers in terms of this year's budget? And now we haven't even touched upon the fact that we will get more money. I know we don't know how much more money, but we will get more money. So my question is, since we were able to save specifically on a line item like line 119, could we not make these hard purchases, meaning the SEL, the guided reading, and the math materials out of this year's budget by rejiggering some line items in this year's budget?
In the 2021 budget,
Right.
that's your question.
Yeah.
That's a possibility. We just have to see over the next few months how it plays out. The way it's going right now is that lining is not being hit as much because of the permanent building subs being paid for with the grant and providing the support that we need. There's less taxing on that account. So we certainly could take that money and do a transfer, a budget transfer into the other line items to provide for these things, if the board chooses to do that.
Okay, Peter was next.
Mute. What do we typically run in a normal environment with regards to substitute teachers, you know, in the district on a given?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that question.
That was unclear, Peter. I don't know what happened.
Nice, and probably internet breaking up. My question was, on in a normal environment, what amount of substitutes do we typically run on an average per day or per week or per month? Is just curious if it's 4, is it 2, is it, what do we?
It does fluctuate, but I know like in 1920, in that line item, we spent $227,271. So typically the money that we have in there, the $255,255 would probably be just about spent. And, you know, whether it's a weekly month or a monthly amount, it's hard to say. It just fluctuates with the number of staff members that are out.
I'm just trying to understand, we're going to pay for substitutes one way or the other. I mean, I just want
Correct.
to make sure that we're, if it's 4 number, or is it 2? Is it 2? And then we'd have 2 I don't want to say sitting around, but we'd have two that maybe weren't as busy. If we don't have them as minutes, we're gonna have to bring them in as dailies. I think the cost we said would be about the same, except that the permanents would have benefits, whereas the substitutes would not. Is that correct?
Yes, on 115 a day is what
Am I breaking up
we
again?
typically
Yes.
pay for that, for the substitutes, for certified.
Okay, Pete?
So the only savings would be yeah, I'm just saying I think it must have broken up, and I'm saying the only savings would be the benefits. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I don't know what's going.
Yeah, because we provided benefits for
Thank
the
you.
permanent building subs,
Okay,
which is
Pete?
currently paid out of the grant right now.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, anyone else have a question?
If I may,
Yes,
Mr.
Mr. Stanek.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I may, free of substitute nurses that we are able to draw from when we need a nurse to substitute?
We usually have to contract out with an agency that will provide us with a substitute for the nursing staff. And it can become quite costly. But we don't have any extra nursing subs on board to pull from.
Go ahead, Fred.
If I may ask another question. Mrs. Holmes, the nurses that substitute, do we have repeat people coming from the agency who are familiar with our district? Or do we just have different people who are not necessarily familiar with our district?
Most of the time you're at mercy with whoever they send.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Ms. Harmling?
A quick follow-up, do we have an estimated number? Obviously not for the school year, maybe not even last school year, but the last normal school year we had, how many days did we need to use an agency for a nurse substitute?
I could get that figure for you, but I'd have to go back
Okay,
to the data. I could provide that to you at the next fiscal meeting, if that would be okay. Unless you want me to email you tomorrow, I'd be happy to do that as well. But I will check back in the expenditures to see how often that happened.
Okay, other questions from other board members? Yes, Ms. Harmling.
if we were not able to fund the grader for the capstone project, what implication would that have? Would we effectively be eliminating the capstone program, but keeping in mind that just because we take $20,000 or whatever out of our budget doesn't mean that it's gone forever, right? We can revisit when we get to the end of the year and we know what's coming. But I did want to ask the question, if there was no stipend for a grader, does that effectively eliminate the program?
Okay, Michael or Vonda?
So if you would like, Mr. Stramello, Mr. Freund could answer that.
Okay, all right. Mr. Freund.
Good evening. Thank you very much. If you recall, the onset of the capstone was put off a year because of the COVID pandemic, and we couldn't have our kids doing community service and going into businesses and finding mentors in the middle of a pandemic. So that being said, the expectation is that the stipends for evaluating the capstone will be delayed a year. In the interim, if something does come up, we would be looking at an open appendix E position to supplement those costs.
Okay, other questions from board members concerning budgets, proposed cuts and stuff? Please speak up. This is your opportunity. Yes, Mrs. Bruno.
I just had a question about the addition of the 0.4 ELA at the high school. What was the amount for that addition?
Jerry?
I need a minute to locate
Okay.
that.
Well, while you're looking, I'm just going to use the time, if it's okay with the chair,
Go ahead.
to support the idea of purchasing the guided reading materials out of this year's funds, if it's at all possible. I don't think those students should wait. I think we need to get them what they need now if we can.
Okay, any other questions in the meantime while Mrs. Holmes is researching that question? Yes, Ms. Harmling. Oh, wait a minute. I see Beth has joined us. Go ahead, Beth.
Hi, I apologize. I was late. I had another commitment. A couple questions. These cuts that were presented in the latest spreadsheet, I assume, or could the administration confirm they're in order of priority in terms of number one being the least important, or what's the numbering significance mean?
So what we did,
Michael?
yep, what we did, Mrs. Nesteriak, was similar at the last meeting where we kind of went through items, one being one that if we had to somehow cut or was the need, we would, and 9 being the one that we absolutely could not cut. When we met with the administrators, we went through that activity again and re-looked at all the priorities and putting that in. That's why you see on that budget spreadsheet, if we were to eliminate 1 through 3, then 1 through 4, then 1 through 5, then 1 through 6. And that was the collective decision to go through 1 through 6, plus those additional cuts, which brings us down to the 255.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. And my second question is, I think Ms. Harmling brought up a good point about bringing forward some expenses into this year's budget. Is there other opportunities that you and your team could think of? I mean, to be honest, these $20,000, I realize all the little ones add up, but it seems that there would be room in this year's budget to move some other additional expenses up. Has your team done a thorough review of that, Mr. Wilson?
So if there's any monies left over, and obviously we hope that there may be, we just don't know. So we would look for that at the end of each year, obviously, and then have that discussion with our board. So these items on our list, to Ms. Harmeling's earlier point, absolutely, and to Mrs. Bruno's point, items that we would be able to cover, that would be wonderful. But to proactively say we can do that now and therefore our budget is going to be at X percent would not be something we could comfortably say at this time. While I think that there might be some money in those line items, then absolutely, for example, some of the guided reading materials and some of the other materials, almost as a pre-purchase. But to say that if we were to do that, that would lower our number to X percent, we're just not at that position to say, just because it's so unknown and it's so variable at this time. While we think there's going to be money, obviously, the budget that we put forth is just the financial and the prudent responsibility of fiscally responsibility. That's all it is. And you're 100% right. If we could move forward and pre-purchase with monies that we didn't use this year, that is 100% to the good. But we just didn't do that in this particular budget because these are items needed for, in essence, next year.
Okay, I just, through the chair, if I could just follow up on that. So with any good budget comes a forecast. So I'm a little surprised that we don't have a better handle on our forecast through the end of the year, as well as grants, but we can work to that. Ed, I don't know what your hands in the air meant, but in terms of we've received grant money, so perhaps we can just take a harder look at the forecast as this board makes difficult decisions about the 22 budget. And secondly, do we have any status update on any of those grants that we've mentioned tonight in terms of forthcoming funds?
We have no information as of yet, but we're waiting. We're told that it is coming. We don't know when. If I could at this time answer Kristen Bruno's question of the 0.4
Sure.
ELA, Chair,
Yes.
Sherry Holmes. It is a 21,000, the cost of a 0.4. And also, could I answer Beth Cernak's question
Sure.
about the forecast?
Sure.
Typically, we do forecasts in February, beginning of March. And that's when most of our expenditures are in the budget, we have a chance to receive the first excess cost payment coming in February. So the tuition accounts and transportation accounts will be adjusted at that time. It gives us a better idea of where we're going to stand towards the end of the year, when most of our expenses are in there, and we can project to the end of June 30th as to where we will have some money or not. We are dealing with a few challenges right now, and I'm hoping that they will work themselves out, and I'll be able to take a better look at the expenditures that we have in this budget. Yeah.
Thank you, Sherry, for the additional information. It's unfortunate the timing doesn't work better in our favor, but at least we'll have a better idea sooner than later.
Yeah, I don't want to do it too early and not have the necessary expenditures that we need in place. We're just finally getting insurance figures and things like that we need to make a better estimate towards the end of June 30th. That's all.
Thank you.
Okay, I saw Mr. Champagne.
Thanks. So I got a couple questions here, and you know, I am not a finance guy by no means, but a couple things stick out to me here. So these 9 items are, I guess that's the first question. Are those the only shuffling or changing of items that we're considering? You know, is there any other, you know, moving around that we could do?
Michael,
Those are the 9 items that we put into the budget as new items. So those are the 9 items that we were were most concerned about. And we wanted to prioritize them and then absolutely come up with 3 basically items that we absolutely have to have, which is the special ed teacher, the music, but we did, if you look at our additional cuts below, we did change it from a full-time FTE to a 0.8. So we were able to cut that down and go with the 0.8 instead of the full-time equivalent. And then, of course, the elementary math resources we need for Bungie and Chatfield. But those were our concentration items, if you would, that we were working with.
Okay, so the other piece that I see, because I know, and I can't remember what we were talking about or what the point was, but the library media position, is that for the high school, correct?
It's
Line number 3?
It's for
No, that was split.
both
that
high
was
school
split
and middle
between the
school.
Middle school and the high school.
Right.
Okay. Wasn't there discussion, I don't know if it was last year or the year before or whatnot, where we had talked about not having that filled, being at getting a demerit of some sort through, I think it was the NEA. Is that still the case?
NESAC report.
Okay, Vonda, do you want to address that?
Sure, I can address that for you. Hi, this is Vonda Tenza. Several years ago, the library media specialist was eliminated. The position was eliminated, and it is a hard position to work without at any level. NEASC, which is the high school accreditation organization, really wants you. One of their criteria is to have a library media specialist active, and we don't. So they cannot make you have one because it is a financial obligation of a district, but they can continue to put you on warning status without one. So Jim Freund has been actively working with us and the middle school, actually for a K-12 library media curriculum, a nice robust curriculum. And our first step, I think we've talked about this, you're correct, Mr. Champagne, for the past few years, would be to bring back, they would both love a library media specialist for their own building, but we recognize that could be a lot of money. So we had talked about, a few days here, a few days at that building. We had worked under that model for the last few years before the position was cut. So it is a warning status that comes from NEASC in the accreditation process. And Mr. Freund is working hard on our 5-year update, and he certainly can add to that through the chair if he wishes. But the bottom line is they like us to have one. We like us to have one.
Chris, would you like Mr. Freund to update you on that?
Sure.
Okay, Mr. Freund?
Thank you. In 2016, when we were evaluated, I don't want to rehash everything, but it's actually the first evaluation in all of Seymour High School's history that we came through without being on warning status. We came through, everything was in checks and everything was in a row. From that point on, of course, they have a long list of recommendations of things to work on. The one recommendation at the time of their visit, they came through, we had a full-time media specialist. 2017, we went part-time. At that, whenever something like that happens, I have to file a substantive change report with the New England Associations of Schools and Colleges. After I filed it with the reduction of a full-time media specialist to a part-time media specialist, they came back starting recommending that I need to go bring back the full-time media specialist. And in the meantime, we were working on curriculum at that point. And eventually the part-time media specialist was cut. And at that point, the New England Association of Schools and Colleges put us on warning status. What that means is every year I have to file a report, update them on the warning status, whether or not it's been taken care of, whether or not we could go forward from there, get off warning status.
Okay, Mr. Champagne?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Sherry, just as an update, and I know it's fluid all the time, but with the changes in the fall sports program and then the elimination of the football program and the cut back to the winter program, do we have any projection yet of possible cost savings there? Because there's not going to be a state tournament. And for those people that don't realize, when you do state tournaments, you have to pay, even though you're in the tournament, you have to pay to get into the tournament. You have to pay for your buses to get into the state tournament, and you have to pay for partial costs for referees. And quite often when you do basketball games, for example, and you're playing in the upper levels of the tournament, you have 3 referees versus 2 referees. And so there's costs factoring into all of that. And I know it's not big because I think people have the misconception the way they used to be that football paid for everything else because people came to games, but that doesn't happen. It didn't happen. And, and attendance at all high school sports in my humble opinion, and somebody who attends many games, attendance has decreased tremendously and that's some money to be made. So it's a long-winded statement, but I'm just wondering if we anticipate any substantial savings in the sports budget. Maybe you can't answer that, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
That will be part of my projection of taking a look at the line items that are non-contractual, like you mentioned, the transportation and the 330 account where the payment of the referees comes out of. Those kind of things will be savings there. And I will have to work with Ernie on that to make sure that I'm not missing anything that we have as an expenditure down the road. But it's not a huge amount of savings, but there will be some savings there.
Yeah, that's what I figured. That's what I figured.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I have a follow-up for Mr. DeStacy on that same thing. Has there been discussions with the athletic directors and the CIAC about requesting from the officials in light of the pandemic for them to freeze their salaries or freeze their pay or actually make a cut in their pay? And I know all my official friends, if they're listening, will say Stramello's going crazy, but so be it.
I can speak to that point, Mr. Stramello. I think that in light of the fact that there have been so many cancellations of so many different sports and seasons have been shortened and middle schools have cut their programs, I can't speak for the officials and their units as far as cuts or freezes or what have you. All I know is there's a lot of hardworking officials who've lost out on a great deal of work. And with these abbreviated seasons, I think it's just kind of like the law of averages working out. But I do know that the shortened seasons have had a huge impact and the lack of seasons have had a huge impact. And I'm just hopeful that these people will be able to start to recoup some of the money that they lost from their work as youth programs start up again and as the abbreviated high school seasons start. But to your point, sir, we haven't had any direct discussions that I'm privy to with any of the officials' units.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from board members? Yes, Ms. Harmling.
Thank you. I completely hear what Mrs. Holmes is saying, that we don't get the excess cost sharing grant information until February, but at the same time, I completely hear what Mrs. Mysteriak is saying, that many of these accounts we can put a forecast against. And when we look down at what we've expended year to date actual, we're halfway through the school year, but we have 59% of our budget left. That's about $3 million if it all stayed tracking the same way. And some of the accounts that have are very low in terms of what we budgeted versus where we are year to date, we know those aren't going to jump up. So for example, bus fuel, you know, we're never going to, we budgeted 102,000, we spent 20,000. Well, we're never going to spend all the way up to that 102 at this point in the year. The same thing, I'll go back to the substitute line item. There's over $200,000 in that line item. We budgeted 255,000. We've only spent 3,700. Luckily, again, I recognize because of the grants. But the fact of the matter is, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, that we can look at right now and say, odds are we're not going to hit that. So now I absolutely know that the unknown is that excess cost sharing grant, and that could go over, and that could be over by $1 million, depending on what the state decides to give us. But I really strongly feel like in the effort of being fiscally responsible, any hard purchase that has a role to play this year, the math materials, the guided reading materials, the SEL materials, all of those could not only be purchased this year because we have a need for them this year, but potentially we could be paid out of a grant. So I'm kind of reluctant to keep any of these line items in, because I feel really confident. The numbers don't lie. There's no possible way we're gonna spend down to what we budgeted for this current school year. And there are things that we can use this school year: math, SEL, guided reading. I'd like to see the guided reading materials enhanced in both schools. So that's just where my head is on this budget.
Yes, Mr. Champagne.
So kind of following up with that too, and talking with about athletics and whatnot. So for the fall season, did we pay coaches in our Appendix E positions?
Yes, we did. A portion of their, I think a third, and a third of their stipend was paid.
So that
I'd have
line
to double
item.
check that.
So that line item will also be less.
Right. Because we paid out, it was determined that this is the amount of money that we were going to pay out, a third of their stipend. And just in lieu of the winter sports, we weren't sure and what was going to happen moving forward. So we decided to at least give them sum of the stipend.
Okay,
I
other
can-
questions?
I can get those exact numbers for you if you'd like.
Well, I think it's more of what are we going to end up doing with all of the excess?
Mhm.
You know, it's hard to make decisions about one-time purchase when, you know, like several of us have said, we're going to possibly go into the end of the year with a good percentage left that we haven't spent. So I think it's kind of important to know that.
Okay,
That's why I will put that projection together and let you know where we're at in February. One thing to think about is that since we've been in this pandemic, the cafeteria has not been receiving their normal revenue. And if you see their financial statement, they're struggling with an accounts payable. So we have to figure out what it is that we're going to do with that, because right now we have an accounts payable of the salaries and the benefits that they need to pay us. So we have to discuss that as well. And that's one of the challenges that we may face with our budget, that we might have to help the cafeteria out, because there just is no other avenue to go as far as the grant money is concerned. I thought maybe we could use some of that grant money to help out, but absolutely not. On that list was no money being given to the cafeteria fund. So we'll have to discuss that at a later date. But it is on her financial report right now. So,
okay, Mr. Garfalo, did I see your hand up?
Yes. Along the lines of the stipends for the coaches, what about the other positions in the Appendix E? Were advisors and other supplementary stipends paid during the course of this school year when there were no activities for those advisors?
yes, they were paid.
Were they paid in full?
It was over their salary, over their amount of pays, 26 pays or 22 pays.
So in
Yes,
other
they
words, so they got free money?
My understanding, there were some club things going on and some planning of different activities. That's why they got reimbursed.
Okay.
For that.
And
That's a contractual obligation also that we have to pay them as well.
when they were selected to be the advisor, let's say in general, someone, we have a club, whether it's a language club or the yearbook, etc. When an individual applies for the position as advisor, does that then, and is approved, does that then become a contractual obligation and must be paid regardless as to whether or not the activities are done?
That's how it has been done in the past, and that's how we continue to do it per contract.
So again,
By the contract.
it's possible we have paid free money for no activity on the part of the advisor. Is that an accurate statement?
I don't know if I'd say free money, but it's my understanding they are working on different clubs and those kinds of things.
And if I may, clubs are meeting virtually. So the clubs are
Yeah.
still meeting virtually. They were meeting both, even with the hybrid model. Some students would have to join remotely when we were in session, and some, so the virtual piece was still happening for some of the clubs.
All right, for some of the clubs, but not all, is what you're saying.
I'd have to pull a list from the schools, but the people who have
Yeah.
signed up to do clubs try to keep with their groups as best they can to keep connected with the students as an extracurricular under the stipendee position. So definitely was not handing out free money. It was an effort by the teachers to support our students, no matter what platform it was, whether they were meeting in person or virtually. So, to our knowledge, those groups that were paid have met either in person and or virtually.
All right, then I'll stand corrected if I am in error, and we move on.
Okay, did I see Kristen Bruno's hand up?
I just had a question about the increase in FTE for music at the high school. That was listed as like the second most essential of the newer items. Could folks talk a little bit about that position and what it means for students?
Mr. Stramello, I'd like to ask Mr. Freund to speak about that, please.
Sure.
Okay, when we had a teacher, Mr. DeMarco, retire. He teaches AP psychology and covers 5 social studies classes. Rather than replacing his position, we considered developing flexibility moving forward in our ability to manage a variety of situations. We happen to have a music teacher who is also social studies certified. And this actually applies to the ELA position as well, the 2/5, because we also have, that position was created for the same reason, to free up 2 teachers and ELA teachers who also are social studies to help us cover the sections, and in particular AP psychology that Mr. DeMarco teaches. Initially, in the first proposal, the music teacher was full-time, and that would have allowed us to cover all 5 of Mr. DeMarco's sections. But now this increased decrease from full-time to 0.8 will only be able to cover 4 of the 5 positions or classes that Mr. DeMarco teaches. But it's better than not having anyone to teach those classes. So we supported the reduction because of the requirement to try to get to a 2% budget.
Okay, Kristen? Bruno?
So are we actually, we're just filling 0.6 of a vacant,
We're
of
filling
the
80
retired position, right?
Correct. We're just filling 80% of a retired teacher position.
Okay. So it's a net reduction of 0.2.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, other questions? Yes, Ms. Harmon.
I'd like to, through the chair, ask Ms. Holmes, can you go back to what you were talking about with the cafeteria and give us just an estimated number where we are year to date in terms of them being in the red, so to speak? And also, I hear what you're saying, that paying cafeteria salaries was not an allowable part of the first CARES Act, but weren't they under some kind of the Payroll Protection Act or that went through December 30th or no? Like part of the staff that we could not lay them off when the schools were closed. We had to carry them through.
Yes, we had to carry them through, but there was a shortened amount of staff that worked. So that amount, some of them did collect unemployment, and others worked that were needed. And so we paid them accordingly. If they collected, we did not pay them. They were paid by unemployment.
So what's the total number that might have to come out of the Board of Ed budget this year?
She submitted her financial statement. I think it's about 200,000 right now.
Well, that's significant. I certainly think we should have included that somewhere.
Let me see. Well, she's been trying to pay down on it when her funds come in. So it's not totally, assume that she's not going to pay this amount. I have an email from her, which she submitted her statement moving forward. If I could pull that up, I would be able to give you that number.
Okay.
I'm also wondering if the second grant coming through the ESSER will allow for some help. And I don't know that for sure, but I'm just saying that it's a possibility that it may.
Okay.
Say, if I could have a minute to find this report, and then I'll give you an exact amount. from
Okay,
that.
other questions?
Through the chair,
Okay, and then Mrs. Nastariak, you're after Mr. Hatfield.
I'll yield to Ms. Nastariak first. I didn't know if you could see my hand.
I could see everything, Jay,
Oh, okay.
just the way Mrs. Nastariak saw everything.
Thank you. Given where we are with this school year and the challenges that we've had, we haven't spent a lot of time, unless it was regarding some of these line items that you identified in this analysis, but we haven't spent a lot of time in what the administration's feelings are, if there's any needs because of the remote learning or the being out of school. And just curious to see, have those been included? How are we addressing that? I know we've heard, some feedback from the our students and parents and teachers around, servicing some of our special needs students. So how are there things that we aren't asking about in this budget that's needed to address that? Or how are we going to handle that kind of going back into normalcy, I'll call it, for lack of a better word?
Okay, Michael Arvanda?
Sure. I mean, that's I don't want to say it's the great unknown, but we understand that, we want to meet the needs of our students the best way that we can, in hopes for a full, as you said, normal return, and we'll use quotes on that, for next year. And, we understand that, we could advocate for a lot more, but we feel that with this 2.55%, and that is the bare, I mean, it's pretty much ripped down to the studs, if you will, using a building analogy. We think that we can still meet the needs of our students. The first thing we want to do is get our students back, get our students to feel comfortable, get our students to reconnect with the adults in their lives. And we started that process today, welcoming our students back in the hybrid model. It was a great day for all. I was able to go around to all the buildings and see that. But as we continue to increase population, Mrs. Nastariak, and we're talking about next year, because this budget is indeed next year, we have to cross off a lot of the hurdles, if you will. And first, the reconnection. Second, to assess where they are, both from an academic standpoint, but also from a social emotional standpoint. We do that through our check-ins that, have been started this year in all of our buildings and will continue next year. And then academically, our teachers, by having the extra professional development time that the board has graciously granted them, they'll continue to work as a group, not only this year, but also when they meet next year for the first couple of days of professional development, to really talk about where they were as a grade level and talk about those curricular needs, and to say, here's where we were, here's where we weren't. Continue to monitor and assess that through not only regular assessments, but also our triennial assessments. So it's hard to put a real quantifier on that. But if you're asking in terms of where we are and can we meet the needs at this presented budget, we feel that we can, and that's why we presented it to the board this evening at the 255. Certainly, would it be nice to have more? Obviously, it would. But we also understand that, we have to keep it as close as possible because of the times that everyone is under, including members of our community during this pandemic. So we understand that, but we think at this number that we can meet those learning needs of our students. Obviously, time will tell, but that is through that monitoring, through those conversations, and providing for our students the best way that we can. Mrs. Tenza, if you wanted to add anything, if I left it out, feel free. But that's kind of the process that we've undertaken, Ms. Nastariak.
You okay with that, Mrs. Nastariak?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Hatfield.
I don't want to get on my soapbox here, but about the cafeteria workers. Didn't they think about that? I mean, if everybody got free lunch and there was no revenue coming in, so to speak, then one, what are other districts doing? And two, Didn't they think of that? The powers that be, you know, or who do you have to contact to rectify that?
There are revenues coming in, and there are grants that she's applying for. It's just at this time, as she has more money coming in, she is paying a little bit at each time. And by reporting on a financial statement, she is letting us know what that the figure is. What she has shared with the board in her report is $203,000. And I am working closely with her to try to get that number down as best as possible.
Okay, Mr. Hatfield?
Yeah.
I can answer part of your question. Where we have to go is we have to go to Senator Blumenthal, Senator Murphy, Representative DeLauro at the federal level, and then we need to go to our, our 105th and Mrs. Claire Detria, and we also have to go to Senator Kelly, who represents the Seymour, part of the Seymour district. And we need to have them advocating at the state level. And hopefully that when President Biden puts some money out there, that some of that money could come to the schools. Because I do hear that they are talking about that. And hopefully the new Commissioner of Education, Mr. Cardona, who is still a Connecticut resident, will also not forget the state of Connecticut when money is handed out. But then at the same token, I don't hold my breath to any of that. Yes, Mrs. Holmes.
I just want to point out, we're not the only district that is experiencing this kind of hardship. And I think we are in better position than most because our program has always been self-sufficient and it did not need any of our funds to support the program. So I think we are a little better positioned. It's not right. I think that maybe we should, advocate for some of the CARES Act money to go in that direction. And I know on CASBO listserv, there a lot of people have been advocating for that to bring that to the senators. And I don't know where it's going to go, but it's a possibility they might move on it. I don't know.
Right.
But to say that we don't know, we did know. And I am working with Cindy Brooks on this. And I do know the amount that she's struggling with, and we're going to work it out as best we can.
Right. And I also should say that our organization, CABE, should be advocating for that. And I hope that the Association of the School Superintendents is another organization that's advocating for the local districts, because it has to be a team effort. If any one of those groups sit down, and I would hope also that the Connecticut, and I'm not sure the right terminology, Mrs. Dragonis, but the municipalities, the Connecticut towns and cities will also advocate for each of the towns. Any other discussion? Yes, Mrs. Bruno.
I want to talk for a minute about the nurse float position. I know, Mr. Stramello, that's been on your mind as well. And I'm going back to my days as a school psychologist and other times in the building where I was right next to the nurse's office. The school nurse is a first responder in our schools. They take care of both our students and our teachers. And thinking about next year coming in, and there's going to be a need to respond to how everyone was affected by the last really 2 school years. Having that kind of consistency and having someone when a nurse has to be out, and let's remember the burnout on nurses too. When a nurse has to be out, if we could have somebody who is familiar with the schools, familiar with the school system, I think that's a shame if we have to cut that. I think it's something we really need to think about as a board.
I will agree with you 150% on that, Mrs. Bruno, because as a former administrator, I remember doling out medication and giving shots and doing that stuff there. And I can't even think now how I would be able to handle that if I was still working and if the nurse wasn't in the building with kids that test positive for the COVID-19. That's got to be an awful responsibility for a principal. But I'm not going to feel too sorry for them because I worked with a building where I had a principal. I mean, I had a nurse for only 2 days a week out of 5. Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Stanek.
Fred Stanek. It appears we're moving away from questions going into discussion and comment. And I would like to follow up further about the nurse. I asked some questions earlier, and now there's discussion about the floating position for the nurses. I think we should be adding that position back into our requested budget. I think it's very important for all the reasons stated, and especially since we're in this COVID situation, which is going to extend beyond this fiscal year into the next fiscal year. So I would suggest that when we make a motion about the budget, that we add back in the floating nurse position.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Harmling.
Yeah, I just want to say that any decision that we make tonight on what the percentage increase is going to be, I know that it has to be reflected in individual lines in our budget. But if we were to vote on the 2.55 or to vote on the 3.05, that does not mean that as a board, we're making a decision and statement that we don't value a floating nurse or that we don't value the idea of permanent building subs, right? Because we have a long way to go until this document is voted on. And we have flexibility all along the way. Quite frankly, we have flexibility even after the budget passes. So for me, I'm trying to take a real holistic look at the budget, how much money I can just intuitively see given where we are in the school year and what line items are not even close to being halfway expended. So I just wanted to put that out there that whatever we cut tonight does not mean that we're not going to see it happen next school year. I'm really trying to take a holistic view on this.
Okay.
And Mr. Stramello, Fred Stanek again.
Yes.
I understand what Ms. Harmley just stated. However, I do think that we should, as a priority, indicate and add into this budget request the floating nurse position.
Okay. All right.
Through the chair, if I may,
Yes.
I wanted to welcome Mrs. Dragonis, First Selectwoman Dragonis, to the meeting here tonight. And I wanted to appreciate that she gave us some prior guidance, but if she wanted to, through the chair, could we give her an opportunity to give us any feedback if she so chooses?
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hatfield. And thank you everyone for working so diligently to make sure that we come in within a budget. I know this is a tough position and I commend everybody for doing such a well job. All we can do is look at the numbers, hope that we can get it to 2.5 and bring it to our voters. I know that the board will do what is right, not only for our teachers, but for our residents as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So if there's no further discussion, the chair is amenable to a motion.
Through the chair, I'd like to make a motion. I'm not quite sure how to go about it in the sense I'm looking at the spreadsheet here and it's, if we wanted to put it in that position for the number 2 nurse floater, if Mrs. Holmes, through the chair, Mrs. Holmes.
Yes, if I could answer that question through the
Sure,
chair.
that's what
Sherry
I was gonna go next.
If we
Yep.
add back the nurse floater, it would bring up our percentage to 2.75%.
Okay, is that satisfactory for you, Mr. Hatfield?
I believe it is. Is there a way to put something in and or reduce to make it that 2.5? And again, I'm looking at your spreadsheet. I know there's a lot going on there, so you would know
Mrs.
better.
Bruno, I thought I saw your hand, then I saw Mrs. Harmeling.
Follow up on what Mr. Hatfield said. Could we make a corresponding cut in the whatever line the contracted nurse subs would come out of to get down to 255?
Mrs. Holmes, could you answer that?
The contracted nurse line item has all the nurses currently budgeted for in that line item. If we were to contract out for a nurse sub, it would have to come out of that line item. So that line item would be over. So I can't, there's no additional money in that nurse line item. Now, we can look in other items for the amount, but I just don't know where we will take that money from.
Okay, Mrs. Harmeling? You're muted still, Kristen.
All right, so I am completely in agreement with Mr. Hatfield and Mrs. Bruno and Mr. Stanek. Let's go ahead and keep that nursing services line, because if I understood you correctly, Mrs. Holmes is in the nursing line right now, but can we not reduce at least two other areas of variable expenses by the commensurate amount, so we stay at 2.55? And my recommendations would be to split it between substitute certified staff and I don't know what else, and maybe custodial services with an absolute admission. And I'd be more than happy myself to say this to the Board of Finance, that, you know, we have kind of under budgeted those line items because we're hoping to be able to move things around, but at least that would show our community and our nurses that we support the position while also keeping it at 2.55. So I'm recommending commensurate cuts from line items 119 and 120.
Repeat those again, please.
119 substitute certified staff and 120 custodial services.
Thank you. Okay, Mrs. Holmes, can you quickly address that or not?
119, the substitute certified salaries. We can take some money out of there. I just don't know about the 120 custodial services. That pays for all our custodians that are in the district.
Yeah.
I don't know that we have any extra money in that line item right now. So I would probably.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Excuse me?
No, go ahead.
No, keep going, Mrs. Holmes, then I'll get to Ms. Harmeling.
I would probably look into a different line item for the balance, and I just don't know where that would be right now. Let's see.
Okay, Mrs. Holmes, can I let Ms. Harmeling speak, then come back to you?
Excuse me?
Can I let Ms. Harmeling speak and go back to you while you're looking?
Yes, please.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Harmeling.
Yeah, thank you. Again, in the effort of full transparency, and we have our first select woman on the line, I am not suggesting that we actually cut that line item by 50,000. It would be reflected in this budget, but this is in an effort to have something that's ready for the town to work from. Because, you know, the town doesn't have authority over our line items. They have authority over our bottom line budget. So I'm just trying to be expedient and kind of move forward, send the signal that we value and we want the nursing floater. And we're going to figure out as the months go by before we get to public hearing.
Okay, Mr. Champagne.
Okay. Just a quick clarifying question. So with the nurse floater, is that a job title that we have today, and has the position been outlined?
Yeah, we have a job description
Okay, perfect.
that was
Thank you.
drawn up, yeah.
But we have not
The nurse
voted on
program.
that yet.
Correct, you're right.
Right.
But there is, Mr. Champagne, there is a feeling amongst board members that's an important position.
I am in agreement as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so my suggestion is that we go along with Ms. Harmling's suggestion, and maybe Ms. Harmling's going to make the motion, and we can get a second, and then we can vote on it.
I would be happy to do that, I think.
Ms. Harmling, I've never seen you be shy on things like this,
Well,
Mrs. Harmling.
I'm not shy. Somebody else ask some more questions and I'll draft something up and we can, I can run it by the board in the form of a motion. Give me a few
Okay, Mrs. Bruno's bailing you out. Go ahead, Mrs. Bruno.
Mrs. Holmes, I had asked a question through email about the unemployment
Yes.
line item because there was an increase in that. Is that something that, for the purposes of what we're trying to do tonight, we could make a reduction in as opposed to custodial services? Because I think there's a different message there than something that could impact the cleanliness of our buildings.
Good point.
Mrs. Holmes, can you respond to Mrs. Bruno?
I mean, the unemployment compensation is an account that fluctuates quite steadily. And what I see now, as far as what we're going to have to pay eventually once our credit is exhausted, I'm going to need that extra money in there. The extra money we're talking about is $5,000. I don't want to dip any lower than the 15 that we have put in there from before.
Right, and to piggyback on a statement that Ms. Harmling made, is that ultimately we have the power to move things between line items once we establish a bottom line budget.
Absolutely.
So, so that's something we could discuss after and if the town fathers decide to give us the amount of money that we're requesting.
Yeah, we certainly have time to do that, yes.
So does that give you enough lead time, Ms. Harmling?
No, a few more minutes.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes, Mr. Kubik.
I was going to say, I mean, I'm in support of the nurse also, but why don't we give the administration the opportunity to figure out, give them time to figure out where they can make that money up instead of telling them where to take it.
Good suggestion.
Fair enough.
Okay, Ms. Harmling, you are ready now.
Well, no, I mean, Mr. Kubik just said not to, you want to make a motion, Peter, we have to adopt our budget tonight, right? So that's why
Yes.
I was trying to be definitive. So
Yes.
we don't really have an opportunity to, and unless the board is comfortable with that. If we're comfortable just saying, cut it where you will, almost like the Board of Finance does, we can do that. But that's not typically what we've done because we're right now adopting this as our budget.
I understand, but I mean, I don't know that we've given them adequate time to determine whether those are the areas that can afford to make where they could take the cuts. We're kind of doing on a moment's notice here, picking line items for them. I'm just saying, unless they can do it real time and know where they can make up that difference, then I would not object to them, coming forth with where that money comes from. Obviously, I agree, it has to come from somewhere. I'm just saying, I don't know that we could pick that area. Is it fuel? Is it stipends for, as we talked earlier, Appendix C positions? I'm not sure. I think, unless they know right now where they can make it, I think we should give them that somewhat of an opportunity, whether it's 5.
All right, we completely lost you, Peter, on that. The last part of that stuff, Peter, we lost you completely. Okay, while Peter fixed his stuff, I saw Mr. Wilson wanting to respond.
Well, I was going to offer a couple of suggestions. I mean, there's a couple of, and I understand Ms. Harmeling's point, and I appreciate that the board must go forward. But I also appreciate Mr. Kubik. I think knowing the parameters of a 2.55% increase with the addition of the nurse floater as the non-negotiables, with possible suggestion of line items such as maybe 119 and or others, I feel would be an appropriate motion with the final pieces cut to be the 2.55 reflected in a document that Mrs. Holmes will share with the board before sending over to the Board of Finance. Another possibility, so I think that would definitely cover the board. That's just my opinion. Another possibility, I think someone mentioned obviously electricity and things of that nature. We know that, we're going to be projected to see some savings, hopefully from the Johnson Control Project. So hopefully, Ms. Harmeling, along with your idea, maybe that's an area where we put as kind of a placeholder, and that gets articulated to the Board of Finance saying, with the anticipated savings, we know we put this as a lower amount, but because we're supposed to see those savings from the Johnson Control Project, as opposed to Mrs. Bruno's point of eliminating possible custodial, which would sacrifice the cleanliness of our buildings. So I think those are areas and items that, to your point, Ms. Harmeling, we can easily defend and why we lowballed those numbers. And I think the rationale behind coming in with a lower item is because of some real projected savings with those projects. So I think you have two options on the table as a board, knowing the non-negotiable being 2.55 with the nurse floater added in, and possible line items suggested by the board for the administration to look at before submitting to the Board of Finance, I feel would be appropriate and cover the board as a motion while keeping the integrity of the board's budget, because as you know, it has to be approved tonight. So I know that was a lot and I included a lot of people, but I wanted to make sure everyone's opinion was heard. But I think those would be more appropriate along those lines.
Okay, Ms. Harmeling.
Yeah, I can give it a shot. And Mr. Wilson, hearing you speak, I for one, am comfortable not even speaking about any line items to reduce. So I'll offer a motion that the board can try on for size. I'd like to make a motion to adopt the presented superintendent's budget with the following changes. Hold to a 2.55% increase as presented in the working document presented to the board on January 25th. That includes the addition of a full-time nurse floater with benefits. I further move that the school administration forward an amended document prior to submission to the town, an amended budget document prior to submission to the town.
Okay, is there a second to that motion, please?
Second, Jay Hatfield.
Jay Hatfield seconds the motion. Okay. Is there further discussion? Yes, Mr. Stanek.
Mr. Stramello, if I may, Fred Stanek. I'm not going to oppose the motion. I understand what's being said, but I really think the board should follow past practice and how we present the budget and reduce one or two other items, line items, to make it balanced. However, I will not oppose the motion.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion needed? Okay, Mrs. Bruno, how do you vote?
This is Kristen Bruno. I agree with Mr. Stanek that I'm not going to oppose the motion, but I think it is one of the prime responsibilities of the Board of Ed to have a say in the budget at the line item level, and I'm cautious about varying from that practice and abdicating that. However, given the time frame we're in, I will vote yes to the motion on the table.
Thank you. Mr. Champagne.
Chris Champagne, I agree with both, but I will vote yes.
Mr. Garofalo.
Jim Garofalo, yes.
Ms. Harmeling.
Ms. Harmeling votes yes, but I would like to state that the expectation is that there is no surprise coming our way when we see this amended document. I think we've had great conversation tonight. Various ideas have been thrown out from board members as well as administration. So I vote aye.
Okay.
With a couple of assumptions.
Okay. Mr. Hatfield.
Jay Hatfield, yes.
Mr. Kubik,
Peter Kubik, yes.
Mrs. Nesteriak,
Beth Mysteriak, yes.
Mr. Stanek,
Brett Stanek, I vote yes with the reservation which I previously stated. Thank you.
and Mr. Strumella votes yes. Motion carries unanimously 9-0. Okay. Second item on our agenda is, for lack of a better way of saying it, Zoom meetings. And I do see Mr. Dyer is here and Mr. Champagne is here. Mr. Champagne, you made a suggestion if you would like to go first, and then I'll allow Mr. Dwyer to go second.
Sure, no problem. I see Mrs. Holmes is itching for attention.
Uh-oh.
Sorry, apologize, Sherry Holmes. Before we move on, we need to decide a very important thing, and that is when we're going to present our budget to the finance board, the town finance board. We have two dates that I emailed to you, Jay and Kristen Harmley, and that is February 3rd and February 8th. And I didn't know which one of those dates you would like to present to the town. I'm told sooner than later. And I have to get back to them with the affirmative date.
Affirmative thing. Mr. Hatfield, I'll go to you first.
The 8th would be good for me.
Ms. Harmling?
I'm checking my calendar. Yeah, the 8th, Mondays are good.
Okay, now, that's fine with me also.
Okay. I will contact them tomorrow and let them know. February is a go. Thank you.
Thank you
Appreciate that.
for reminding us.
You're welcome.
Okay, Mr. Champagne, you were gracious enough to notice Mrs. Holmes up there in the right, which I didn't see. Go ahead, Mr. Champagne.
All right, thank you. So in talking with Ed and Jay over the past week or so, I feel that we should start moving towards getting our faces and whatnot involved in the public. I know that we stream the audio to through the YouTube, but I think there's some features within Zoom, and Mr. Dyer or Mr. Martin probably has a little better knowledge in that. But from my understanding, we could use, I know the waiting room is an option. I know that I think it's called a seminar where you can actually broadcast. I don't think we would broadcast the Zoom meeting itself. I don't believe we would have enough participant space to allow that, but I think what we can certainly do is, move towards a more interactive meeting with the board and the community, and possibly using the waiting room to allow people to come in and speak their public comment instead of writing or whatnot. And I think that could be done without video. We could just stick to the audio. And then this would be a good leverage point to also bringing us into the 21st century when we do get into live meetings, allowing us to possibly have a camera there and allowing the same functionality for folks that are either fearful of coming in during COVID. It should be still going on for some months, but allowing them to still come in, make comments, seeing the meeting, and going from there. So that was just a thought that I had, and would like to see what we can do about that.
Mr. Dyer, would you care to add your expertise?
Sure. Good evening, everybody. So I just want to give a little background before we get into the nuts and bolts of everything. But when the pandemic started, we were given a free license to Zoom. All education-related domains were all given the same courtesy. Mr. Champagne alluded to some functionality and features that are in Zoom that we may be able to utilize. Many of those features are not included in the education version. To my knowledge, I don't even think it's published on Zoom's website. In terms of, I don't think the features that are available on the education piece of Zoom that they're providing to us for free, I don't think they're published where you can go and even look at them. There is a free basic version of Zoom, but that's not the same version that we were given by Zoom. So, back when the pandemic happened right in the beginning, we utilized Zoom with the majority of the teachers and students using Google Meets. So we kind of had a two-platform setup there, and Zoom really was only being used by the administration and the Board of Ed. Part of the restrictions on the Zoom account is with the free education version, there is not native streaming ability to YouTube. I was able to figure out a workaround using some streaming software that gamers use to stream to YouTube accounts. So essentially what I'm doing is sending my desktop audio out over the internet to a YouTube live stream using some software that I have. I am able to share my desktop screen in that same stream, but I wouldn't recommend doing that just because of, pop-ups and who knows what else might happen. There is a version of Zoom that we can purchase that does have native capability of streaming to Zoom. That would be the Pro version. There's a few tiers of service that Zoom has with their paid versions, and the delineator is really the number of participants that you have in the Zoom meeting. And I think this is probably going to be the largest issue that we would have to deal with if we did decide to start going down that path, because my solution that I came up with in the interim is kind of a bridge that we never really expanded on. And don't quote me on this because I looked at these prior and I'm trying to remember here as I'm finding it here. But the Pro version of Zoom only allows you to have up to 100 participants in the Zoom meeting. I have looked previously at some of our meetings, and there were well over 200, streaming it from the YouTube stream. So I don't know, Mr. Champagne, if the intent is to only have people who plan on making a public comment join the Zoom, and everybody else listen along on YouTube, which would keep those number of participants down to a manageable number, or if the intent is to abandon YouTube completely and switch over to having everybody in the Zoom room, whether it be the waiting room or a breakout room or something else. But just to give you a little context of what I'm talking about, the Pro version that allows up to 100 participants, you can purchase those one license at a time. The next tier up, which would allow 300 participants concurrently in the Zoom meeting, is substantially more expensive. They don't allow you to buy them individually. You have to buy them in packs of 10. And the cost goes from $150 per year with 100 participants. The next tier up moves up to $2,000 a year. So there's a substantial jump, and that's just on the cost side of things. Clearly that's a consideration. I don't know if it's the largest one, but it's there. The second, and I think the more important piece to this is the management of the meeting, the moderation of the meeting. I don't know if you're aware of what the opposite, my end of things looks like, but it can get pretty hectic when you get a ton of people, joining. Some people join sometimes with random names. So just for instance, if you get a request for public comment from Susie Smith may not be in the Zoom meeting as Susie Smith. She may be in there as iPad 1. And it would be very, very difficult to sort through a list of 200 participants and trying to find who Susie might be. The other thing I thought about using would be, like the raised hand feature. Unfortunately, anybody joining over the phone doesn't have that feature available to them. So I think it's very doable. I had a conversation with Mr. Wilson last week, I believe, about adding the video to the stream that goes out to the public over YouTube. I think we can accomplish that relatively quickly. I think Zoom has improved their security very much so since the beginning of the pandemic. And I don't think there's as large a risk of Zoom bombing and things of that nature as there was in the beginning of the pandemic when this solution was initially put into place. I think the larger issue, from what I can see, comes into play when you try to have live public comment. The Board of Selectmen and the other boards in town that have been using Zoom Pro for a while, I don't want to say they're less intriguing than us, but they certainly have less participants of live public comment. So I think it's easier for them to manage. They may have, on a contentious issue, they may have 20 people, where we have quite a few more than that. So I would suggest, it would be my suggestion that we start sending out the video after purchasing the pro version of Zoom for $150 a year. And I would suggest continuing to keep the public comment as is. But I'm certainly willing and open to do whatever the board deems necessary.
Okay, Chris, do you want to ask questions of Rob more so?
Oh, I mean, that seems to be the most trying part of it all, is trying to work in the comments. I have seen other town boards that do allow that. It would take some coordination. But I think it's something that we could do and possibly, like we have public comment being sent to myself, have people who want to actually speak, send their name and whatnot. And then in a response back to them, we could just tell them, with pictures, when you come into the Zoom meeting, make sure your name is changed in this, text box and whatnot. But that's just my idea. I don't know anybody else's feeling, but I think the priority is definitely to get our faces out to the public. That would be my first priority.
Okay. Anyone else wanting to comment on this item? Yes, Ms. Harmling.
I agree with Mr. Champagne that the first priority is to be on video. I didn't quite hear, can we continue to stream it on YouTube and be on video, Mr. Dyer? I wasn't quite sure I understood the first part of the conversation.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, the two are not mutually exclusive. We can do both. Again, the larger issue here, the video streaming is very easy to accomplish with a proper license. The larger issue, I think, would be moderation and numbers of participants if you were to allow live public comment.
So if I may, Rob, through the chair.
Go ahead.
Is it concurrent users or total that entered and exit through the entire meeting?
No, I believe it's concurrent users. I don't think it keeps a running tally.
Okay.
But that's my understanding of it.
Okay, Ms. Harmling?
That's an excellent point, Mr. Champagne, because first I think we should next meeting is only a week away, right? We'll just video, right? I think to try to work out live public comment by next Monday is aggressive, but I do think that there is a way to do it, because to Mr. Champagne's point, if someone sends in a public comment, we can actually put a form together, a public comment form. Download this form, name, address. Do you want to have the opportunity to speak in person? Put it right on that form. If so, not in person. Do you want to speak live? If so, live comments are limited to 3 minutes, right? Put it right out there. Board chair's discretion to lower that to 2 minutes, exactly like we would do if we were in a very heavily attended in-person meeting. And then that individual person gets a link. They're led into the waiting room. When they're done public comment, they're exited the meeting. So I think we can do it. I hear completely what you're saying, Rob, but those folks doing public comment, we don't have to keep them in our Zoom meeting for the entire meeting. They make their public comment and they sort of, in effect, sit down, just like they would if we were in an in-person meeting. So I would love to give that a shot for perhaps the March meeting, but I do think it takes some education and helping people understand the limits, because it's common sense, right? People know if there's 50 public comments, we can't spend 5 minutes on each public comment. And that's exactly what we would do with an in-person meeting, right? Mr. Strumella would look out, see a room
Right.
full of people, and he would make that decision right there that because there's so many, we have to limit to 2 minutes each. And I think we could handle it the same way.
Okay. Anybody else wishing to comment on that? Yeah, Mrs. Bruno?
This is Kristen Bruno. I think I like that plan for March because I think it will take some time to set it up for the February meeting and meetings in between now and then. Do we have a limitation, just like we would limit the amount of time for someone was speaking? Do we have a limitation for a word count for letters that are submitted?
Yeah, we do. I think it was 350 words, if I remember correctly. But I forget that. Leanne might remember. But we do have a word limit, Mrs. Bruno.
I believe it's 300.
300, okay.
If I could just jump in quickly, Mr. Strumella, that information was left off of the last meeting. So we just have to try to be super consistent that we put all that information on the meeting agenda, because last meeting's agenda didn't even have a time of when the comment had to be submitted by, and there was some confusion. So we just have to be consistent in what we put,
Gotcha.
like by what time, number of words, etc.
Gotcha. Okay, anyone else wishing to speak to the subject?
Mr. Chairman, if I can.
Yes.
Just looking for a little clarification. Is Mr. Champagne was running the public comment previously. Is he looking to do the moderation, or are we going to keep things as is?
If I don't have to moderate, I won't offer up my. But I would be willing to work with whoever is running the meeting to collect anybody who would want to come in and speak. And have them speak in the order that they're, sent the request in. And I also think that, in the effort of time, we have to make it clear that, you have to be at least in the waiting room. And if you're not there, then, we're going to have to move on. We can't wait around 3, 4, 5 minutes for every person. So, be in the waiting room for when the meeting starts, because the first round of public comment happens at the beginning of the meeting. So if everybody's lined up and ready to go, I think it shouldn't be too much of an issue.
Okay, that answers your question, Rob?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, all right. I'm sensing that we really don't need a motion on this. I think it's just that we move forward with this change. But I see Ms. Harmling's hand up, so she's questioning that. Go ahead.
No, I'm not questioning that at all. I'm not questioning. I don't think we need a motion either. I just wanted to build on what Mr. Champagne was saying. I have a differing opinion through the chair. I do not think that should be an IT function to moderate and have to control the flow of public comment. I think that's a responsibility that really does sit squarely with the board. It's hard to make those decisions of when to tell someone you've exceeded your limit, when to tell someone, I'm sorry, you missed your opportunity. And I don't think that should be put on our IT staff.
Okay.
Mrs. Harbling, if I could, through the chair.
Yes.
I appreciate that. There's also, the added concern of we're constantly monitoring the stream to make sure that it's up and people are able to hear it. There's a lot that goes into the back end that's kind of unseen. I just think it could get kind of hectic. So I do appreciate the sentiment. Again, we're willing to do whatever we have to do. It does sometimes put us in an odd situation. When I was getting the public comment, I had to sometimes make a decision very quickly or send it off to the board chair or the superintendent and say, hey, there's some personal information in here. Do I read this? Do I not read this? And it was kind of an odd situation to be in. I'm thankful that Mr. Champagne took that over. And I appreciate the sentiment.
Could we, if I may?
Yes, go ahead, Chris.
Could we possibly have, 2 hosts go on?
You can have a co-host.
Okay.
I have to be honest. I don't think I've ever run a meeting with a co-host. I don't know what functions the co-host tag does for you. I think it's something that we should certainly test. And if I might offer a suggestion, we could certainly have for the February meeting, the video streaming with public comment the way we're doing now, with the intent to implement this new test run of this, so to speak, for the February meeting with respect to public comment.
For the March meeting, you mean?
I'm sorry, March, yes.
Yeah. Okay, now, Mr. Champagne, you're not suggesting that the the chair would be the co-host, are you?
I would never dream of it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Through the chair, can Mr. Tyler, can you speak to some of the other meetings in town? Who does the moderating for the public comment, as you were talking about before, if they come in? I haven't really seen them, but
Yeah, so to my knowledge, and First Selectwoman Dragonis can correct me if I misspeak here, but I believe that either Rory Burke or Malia McCool run the meetings for the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance. I believe one of the members of the Board of Police Commissioners runs their meeting. I think it's Mr. Kelly. So I think there's kind of one way, you know what I mean? It goes kind of different ways depending on what board you're talking about. But I think that's how it is currently with those other boards.
Mrs. DeGronis, would you like to jump in on that, please?
That is correct. Rory Burke or Malia does the Board of Selectmen, and Kyle Kelly runs the Seymour, the Police Commissioners meeting. So if you could have someone from the Board of Ed run your meeting as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, are we all set now of what we're going to attempt with the February meeting and then the follow-up on the March? Is there any further clarification needed? Okay, hearing none, I think that the next item would be a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Chris Champagne.
Chris Champagne moves to adjourn. Who seconds that?
Kristen Harmeling will second.
Okay, Mrs. Harmeling, I heard first. Peter, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay, Mrs. Bruno,
Aye.
Mr. Champagne,
Yes.
Mr. Garofalo,
Yes.
Ms. Harmeling,
Yes.
Mr. Hatfield,
yes.
Mrs. Nesteriak,
Yes.
Mr. Stanek,
Fred Stanek, yes.
and Mr. Stromello votes yes. 9-0.
Thank you, Skip. Man.
Good evening. Thank you for everybody. I thought it was a very productive meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.